ever gone outside at night, looked up, and wondered what it looked like if you could see things the opposite direction? Probably not, right? But that's sometimes the way that I think. These days we have this convergence of planets and various things happening in the constellations. And I've found that fascinating through the years. I go out and I look up and I see, I see some lights. I can't see all those things that are there. I do understand it from the writings of Bollinger, book that he wrote many years ago, of Witness in the Stars. And it literally, as the scripture says, the heavens declare the glory of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. It also declares the story of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. But we go out and we look up. What would it be like if we could be somehow given an opportunity to look down and to see how, just as the heavens declare His glory, so does the events that are happening upon this earth for those that are willing to see them. And with that, we're going to get into the final chapters of the story of Yosef. This is one that I don't know, probably yes, this is the story that I really don't like to get to the end of, because I find the story so fascinating, so full of types and shadows and prophetic significance. But let's don't lose the truth of the story, the main focus of the story, with trying to find all of those types and shadows and prophetic things and stuff to write books about. These chapters are about this: the coming together of a family that was dysfunctional. It's still going to have its dysfunction. That's not going to. It's going to change a little bit, but there's still some dysfunction there that we're still living out in our day. But they've walked through a lot of things, and here we're going to read about the uniting of this family. And I think that maybe the reason that I love this account so much is because it makes me look around and find hope that there is going to be a uniting of this family, the family of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I was talking with someone yesterday, and they were talking about how they were going back and teaching a little bit more on the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, the so-called two houses of Israel. And we discussed it from the aspect of there are so many Messianic Hebrew roots congregations that if you walked in and said something about two house or the two kingdoms, or of Ephraim and Judah, they would look at you and say, "What? I've never heard anything like this. What are you talking about?" Others would say, "Well, been there, done that. Really didn't like the division that I found that it caused, and so that's just not a focus of mine anymore." For those that maybe have fallen into that trap, I challenge you to go back and read the prophets. And you'll find in the prophets this amazing account of, or prophetic focus, I guess would be better terms, that it's about the uniting of his family. It's about the division that happened under Solomon, and we could go back to David and all of these things that these things that led up to, but the dividing of the family, which will become the uniting of the family. And at that time, as I've said, the most dysfunctional family that has ever lived on planet Earth will one day be ruling and reigning with Messiah from Jerusalem, from the covenant land. And that is that's a realization that so few have come to. And if you're part of that realization, if that's something that you see, you can be thankful. You can be very thankful that you have been given an insight I follow various groups on the internet, on Facebook specifically, and it's disheartening sometimes just how biblically illiterate people are. And it's also a little bit frightening and humbling, because it makes me realize how at one time, how biblically illiterate I was regarding Israel, regarding the family, regarding the two houses, regarding Judah, Ephraim. I'm probably still very much in the kindergarten stage in that, but I'm thankful for the revelation that I have been able to walk in. So let's not walk away from maybe what is of most importance to him, and that is bringing his family back together. And we see this in this week's Torah portion of he approached, or Nagash, Venagash. My Hebrew is worse than my English, of course. But let's look at the word for just a moment. It's about this account of Yehuda, or Judah, as he approaches Yosef. Yosef has set the trap for these boys of whether they will do as they had done to him and try to sell him into slavery. Of course, they ended up, that didn't go exactly like planned, but it did go as planned as far as Joseph was concerned, to bring the family to a place right here. And so it is Yehuda, the one who is now with Yosef, he thinks is out of the picture. We have Reuben, who has compromised himself from the firstborn role. We have Simeon, Levi, who have done the same. And now the role of the firstborn, the protector of the family, has gone to Yehuda. And it is Yehuda that steps up. And he walks over to Yosef. It says that he approached. Now, the word here is a nun, a gimel, and a sheen. The nun, of course, is life. The gimel is like a man walking, and the sheen is like teeth, or to consume. And what I see, I don't know if this is totally correct. These pictures of the Hebrew Aleph Beit are kind of open for discussion, but here's what I see in this, is a man who has found a place in his life through the account of Yosef being given over into slavery, through his time of separating himself from the family, and also the account with Tamar. What has he found? He's found something of himself. And so the nun is about life, the sheen is about consumption or consuming. It's a powerful letter. And so is this this word of he approached, is this about the person of Yaakov or Yehuda and who he has become? That he is a man of humility. Now, the word humility, or the attitude, the trait of humility, is one that has been so misunderstood through the centuries. Humility is known as weakness. People that many would consider humble would be, kind of the Mr. Rogers kind of type of personality. Someone who is the wallflower that sits in the corner, that never says a word. That's to me is not humility. That's a person that maybe has never, and I'm using Mr. Rogers and all kinds of different people, but humility is kind of someone that's never really found themselves. That's a false sense of humility. It's more of a shyness, because a person that finds themselves understands that they have something to give. And this is true with Yehuda. Let me define humility like this. Humility is strength for the right purpose. settle in there. Humility is strength for the right purpose. This type of humility is many times regarded as arrogance, as pride, and can be, that's so totally opposite from what the truth is. Judah had learned who he was in these times, and he stepped up in this moment to defend his brother or his half-brother Benjamin, the same as he should have done. And this is probably going through his mind. Actually, I think it's as we look at the scriptures, we would see that this is true, that the whole scenario of how he should have defended his brother Yosef, and he sees his failure in doing that, and now he's given a second chance. We would see later on, this will be in next week's Torah portion, and also at Devarim, that Yehuda will be given the place of the scepter. Is it because Yehuda stepped up here that he is going to be given a role in the lineage of the Messiah himself? Because he decided that humility had to be a trait that was a trait of strength and not one of weakness. Now, the word says that he comes to, and where am I getting this humility part is, he says, please Adonai. He's not demanding at this moment in time, but I believe that he is confident. He's confident that he can that he can talk this man through this thing. And so he's willing to give of himself, which is another characteristic of humility that has strength. He goes to him and he starts this negotiation process. And within this negotiation process, Yosef has to be just sitting there and reenacting all that has gone on, and he's grading the boys. He's grading the boys based upon the one who is now taking the role as the firstborn, and that is Yehuda. In the end, A+. There's not a better grade, because what does it do? In chapter 45, it says that Joseph could no longer control his emotions in front of the attendants and cried, "Everybody away from me." He cleared the room of everyone. Why? Because the humility of his brother had brought him to a place of uncontrolled emotion, of love. This is going back to the statement that we began this account with, when he is up toward Dothan. He is there in the area of Har Barakah, the Mount of Blessing. He says, "I'm looking for my brothers." For all of these years that he's been in Egypt, those words were still true, because the dream was true. He never gave up on his dream, which means he never gave up on his purpose of looking for his brothers. And here he finds that there's been a change of heart, a change of their innermost being. And he finally blurts out these amazing words, "Ani Yosef." I am Yosef. I am Joseph. Can you imagine what the room is charged with right now? I mean, the scripture says that they were dumbfounded at seeing him. I think that is like a great understatement. Dumbfounded, amazed, bewildered. We could put a number of adjectives right in there. But they're just staring at him well, let's just put it in good old Southern terms, like a cow looks at a new gate. They're just there. And he once again says, Ani Yosef Aki, I am Yosef, your brother. It's come full circle. He's now found his brothers. He says, whom you sold into Egypt. Now, they tried, okay, originally one of them tried to kill him, and then they tried to sell him into slavery, and that didn't, well, they did, but they didn't profit from it, okay? And he says, you're the ones responsible for it. So the very fact that they had not profited from the action does not mean that they are not guilty of the action. The word Egypt is kind of an interesting one to throw in here. The word Mitzrayim in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, Egypt, means dark or black earth. So it's, again, a place of darkness. Yosef was sold into a place of darkness, but what did he find? He found the riches of that dark earth. He found a place to be fruitful, even in a place that in the word meaning, it means darkness. You know, I'm going to possibly say, if I've got some time, I'm going to say a little bit toward the end. But there's a lot of people today that are living in darkness. There are very few that have been able to find riches in that darkness. Maybe I'll get to that in just a few more moments. This is the account here of the place that the whole account of Messiah ben Yosef, Messiah son of Joseph, Messiah son of David. The role is kind of transitioning in the person of Joseph, though I don't see him actually taking that role, but is more of a transitional period toward that role. With this, let's talk about my belief, possibly your belief, of Yeshua being Messiah, son of Joseph. Okay, it's something I've talked about numerous times, but I think that in the midst of this account, it's very appropriate to go back to it again. The Jewish writings state, using this account and these words right here, that Messiah, son of Joseph, will walk among us, but we will not recognize him. And it will only be when Messiah, son of David, comes that he will reveal to us who Messiah, son of Joseph, was, and we will be astonished and amazed that he was able to walk among us and we not recognize him. You know, I could do a lot of commentary right there on those words. I could go a lot of places, and some of you have heard me do that. I'm just going to allow those words to hopefully, prayerfully resonate with you individually of what those words mean to you. I believe, without a shadow of a doubt, in my own mind, that Yeshua, the one who was, I believe, again, conceived at Hanukkah, was born during the time of Sukkot, I believe him to be Messiah, son of Joseph. And I believe that he will return as Messiah, son of David. No doubt in my mind. But the revelation for many is still out there in the balances. And so I'm just going to let you kind of roll with that one as you would like. Now, this time of Joseph will rule, but it will not be given over. Okay, and this is why I say that the transition here between Messiah, son of Joseph, Messiah, son of David, there's a transition here, but it is not the giving over totally of the rule unto Judah, or the Lion of the tribe of Judah. That will be. Okay, I got to throw something in there. I was talking to Barry, or talking to someone yesterday, Barry or somebody, talked to a lot of people. So they'd heard, no, it was Barry. I'm going to blame him on this. They had seen a post on Facebook. Yeah, you guys know that I do, we've got a Facebook group with the Shema Israel. I challenge people to, at 9 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, or more often if you'd like, to recite the Shema. There was someone that posted that the Shema was the mark of the beast. It's like jaw drop. I got that little look there of like the brothers looking at Joseph, that cow with the new gate. That because it says that you shall bind these words upon your hand, you shall place them upon your forehead, that's actually the mark of the beast. So those that are saying the Shema are receiving the mark of the beast. Let me tell you what my opinion is on that one, that the lion is the king of the beast. Okay, so if that's a mark, then bring it on. No doubt in my mind, bring it on. The mark of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Shema. Okay, there's few shepherds, and then there's the sheep that don't want shepherds. And when you don't want a shepherd, guess what? It takes you into stuff that it's not fuzzy theology, it's just goofy theology. Okay, move on from there. In chapter 45, we see this as Joseph sends his brothers back to get his father, and the father, Yaakov, here's another prophetic picture here. Yaakov is brought into Egypt. Now, for me, it would have been more appropriate for Joseph to have said, Pharaoh, I think I've left you in a pretty good position here, and so I'm going to go ahead and take off and go back to Canaan with my brothers and see my father. But instead, he sends for his father to be brought to Mitzrayim. One of the aspects of this is because Yaakov or Yosef had committed to this time period of getting Mitzrayim through the famine. So we see Yosef as a man of his word, a man of commitment. Now, we can get into this later on. Why is it that after the famine was over, why did they continue? Well, because it had been prophesied that they would, okay? That's kind of the end of the story right there, that it was prophesied that they would, so they did. And then we'll continue to read the coming back out in other Torah portions. But the father's presence in exile. Many have said, well, where is the presence of the Father today? Do we see it? Do we see the presence of the Father? If we look at Ephraim, if we look at modern day Constantinian Christianity, what is the focus of Christianity been? The focus of Christianity has been, though they do not to quote Hanok Young, 10 out of 9 would never understand this concept, but the focus of exile has been Yosef, has been the prophetic picture of Yosef, not of the Father. Is this telling us that there is going to be a time, maybe before some events happen on this earth, that there will be an outpouring of the Father's presence upon us in exile? I guess we'll just have to wait and see that one. Now, Yosef knows his brothers. He knows them very well. And one of the kind of funny pieces of this account is this, that as he's telling them to go back and to get his father, he says to them in chapter 46, verse 24, don't quarrel along the way. That would be a great piece of advice to us today. Quit quarreling along the way. And I actually, going back to the Hebrew word here on this, it is translated many different ways. We could see this as, don't lose your shalom, don't lose your peace, don't become angry. And I do like the way that King Jimmy translated this, or those that did it for King Jimmy, is he says, and don't fall out with each other. Now that's a pretty, I guess that's a more of a southern term. Maybe, I don't know if they use that up in the north or various other places, but we've always, my grandmother, well, they had a falling out. Okay, if there was a church split, they had a falling out, or something, some people in the family that got angry at each other, they had a falling out. And so what is he saying here? Don't have a falling out with each other along the way. Keep your focus. You've got a job to do, and that is to go and get the father and bring him back to Egypt. Is that maybe a key to what we should be doing in this day, of instead of arguing and falling out with each other over everything and anything, and even some made up things, is it possible that we should be focusing more on bringing the Father's presence into exile? Okay, again, I'll leave that one with you. Chapter 46 is, we begin to see this as Yaakov now has been told, your son Yosef is alive, and he wants you to come down to Egypt. Well, they get as far as Beersheba, and if you remember all the things that have happened in Beersheba, Yaakov stops right there. Why? Because this is kind of the jumping off point for him. If he continues on, is he making the right decision? Is he just following in the steps of his grandfather Abraham when he fled to Egypt because of famine? Or is this the direction that he's supposed to take? So he stops there, and it says he offered sacrifices to the Elohim of his father Yitzhak. Offered sacrifices. What was he doing? He was spending a time of prayer. Okay? We look at sacrifices today as something people have forgotten really the purpose of. The offering of a sacrifice was to draw near. It was to draw near in obedience. And we could say the same thing. We are to give ourselves, our own lives, as a olah, a living sacrifice unto him. And so it was a moment in time of asking the question, should I continue on this path? Seeing Yosef, imagine what it has been for this man for these, 17 years or so. Imagine what it's been. I don't know if I can't remember if I got the numbers right on that one, but imagine the time period. There has not, he had no closure. Okay, for those, and I know many that have lost children. I've done funerals. I've been in hospitals. I've wept with them. I cannot imagine I would not want to try to imagine this thought that it comes out in the statement, there's not a day that goes by. My grandmother, that shoulder of blessed memory, had 6 children, I believe it was 6, lost every single one of them through her life. There was only one that outlived her, and that was my mother. Most of them died, either one in infancy. They were tragic deaths. A car accident, head-on car accident, and a fire. I mean, it was not just, it was not a disease, or it was horrendous death, things that there was, you get a phone call, and I remember that night. I remember that night so clearly of when my Aunt Helen died in a car accident as they were driving from Tallahassee over to Jacksonville to see my mother and my grandmother. I remember hearing the screams of my grandmother that night. You never get over that. Yosef, or Yaakov, never had closure. There was always, here's the coat, there's some blood stains on it, and that was it. Let's don't talk about it anymore, because we don't want to feel the guilt that comes from all that, of what we did. But for Yaakov, he had lived with the mystery. Always a hope against all hope that Joseph was alive. And so the stop at Beersheba is an ultimate test for him. Is the covenant. It is seeing my son Yosef, is it greater than the covenant? I think in his mind he was thinking, if I leave this land, I'm turning my back on the covenant. What would my grandfather have done? What would my father have done in this moment? Is seeing the face of my son, is it worth me turning my back on the covenant? When in actuality he wasn't, because we see the words that the Almighty tells him, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. In fact, this is part of my plan. Okay, you're going to go down there, you're going to die, and so is Yosef. Okay, and I'm going to bring your family back here. But just as I spoke to your grandfather, you may be few in numbers coming down here, but you're going to leave as a great, mighty multitude when heading back. So it's okay. There are times that we need to question things in our life like that. Now, moving on, the family does go to Egypt, of course. They're greeted by the Pharaoh. Actually, the family is taken to Goshen, and then the Pharaoh asks for an audience with Yaakov. And these kind of amazing words he says, my days have been 130, my days are few. I haven't lived as long as some of my ancestors did. This man standing there in front of Pharaoh, you have to imagine what was Pharaoh thinking here. This is the man that had been responsible for raising the person who had kept you on the throne. And so even though Pharaohs were not known for their humility, thinking they were pretty much gods, this was a humbling experience for Pharaoh. You got to hand it to him. He handled it pretty well here. Now, the family is over in Goshen, and it says that you will ensure, this will ensure that you live in the land of Goshen, for any shepherd is abhorrent to the Egyptians. By design, there was a separation here. that they were not just, given the full reign of the land of Egypt. They were not just, brought to the border and said, hey guys, just, go out there and find yourself a nice house and live life. We'll meet back here every Shabbat. No, they were actually given a land in their settlement in Goshen as a way of separation for the Hebrews. Now, what will happen between here and the first chapter of Exodus is, I think, what happened with Lot is Lot left the covenant of Abraham when he turned his gaze towards Sodom. We see him turning his gaze and then setting his tent toward and eventually living, in the city square on Main Street somewhere. This would be the same thing that happened with the Hebrews, as they would come into Goshen, but instead of setting their gaze toward Canaan, they began to set their gaze toward Egypt. Wherever you set your gaze, it's where you will end up living. Is that the story of exile for us? And is that why when today you talk about Israel, you talk about the kingdom, you talk about the kingdom coming and us leaving and going to the land, you put an Israel flag, in a setting behind us, behind me like I do, and people get upset. People don't want to hear it. I mean, I can tell you, people don't want to hear it. The very basic message that Hanok and myself teach on a weekly basis of Israel being the focus, the apple of his eye. What Barry Phillips has said is that, if his eye is always upon the land of Israel, then if you're outside of that, then you're in his peripheral vision. But let's make, this is not political. Please don't take this as political. Let's make Egypt great again. Why? Because we set our gaze. And the time that the Hebrews will go into, which will cause them to become slaves, will be about trying to get their gaze pointed in the right direction again. And that's the story that we see of the life of Yosef. Now, I've got about 10 minutes here, 10, 11 minutes. By the time this is released this week, I'll be recording again next week, of course, but God willing, Bezrat Hashem. But this is really the last message prior to the turning of the page of the Gregorian calendar. All right, I got it. That you and I are, we go by the biblical calendar. We go by, people argue about when it is, when it starts, all of those crazy things because of not learning to not quarrel along the way, right? So I understand that the Gregorian calendar is not something that we're supposed to focus on, but let's face it, folks. My house payment is due based upon the Gregorian calendar. My bank has never called and said, so which day of the Hebrew calendar would you like that, to coincide with? No, they go by the Gregorian calendar. Every time this is ancient history. You remember when we had checks? Once in a while, you get to write a check, right? And you put down what? 2020. And we were told this year to make sure you put 2020 so that someone did not counterfeit your check and make it into a different year and be able to cash your check and clean out your account. That's how we began this year, okay? With some crazy conspiracy like that, and look where it's gone. So, with all that nonsense being said, there is something psychological. Now, I do not believe that with the dropping of a ball in New York, or the dropping of whatever they drop wherever they drop it, okay, I do not believe that that is going to just all of a sudden transform the world into normal and we go back. No. Or what's going to happen politically? Well, you can read the same pundits as I do. You can read the same pajama prophets that I do, and that's a new term, folks. Just made it up right here. Those that sit there in their pajamas and think that they're a prophet and post on YouTube, and when they're wrong, they just blame you and say, well, the reason my prophecy didn't come true is because you didn't pray enough. Really? Go get a job. So, I don't believe that we're just going to be poof and all of a sudden everything is going to be back to, 2018. No, because we're moving forward. Now, with that being said, there is something psychological about the turning of a calendar year. What are you going to do with it? What am I going to do with it? I have to be very honest with myself and admit that, and this is maybe you're the hero, and you walk through it with rose-colored glasses and never had a moment's time that you got aggravated at 2020 because you couldn't go to the restaurant you wanted, or you feel like a criminal if you don't put on a mask, and maybe you walk through it perfectly, or about probably the only way you did that is if you didn't go out your door, but that's another story. 2020 was a year that was supposed to be about vision. 2020, right? 2020 is supposed to be about vision. It's a year that many people lost their vision. Maybe it was a year that the Father was asking us to, and this goes back to the gaze of Egypt. Maybe 2020 was a year in which he was asking us to not gaze at our own vision, but to gaze at his, to refocus, to set our tent door to Jerusalem, to Israel, to his kingdom. Our Hanukkah party the other night, we were doing some you might be a messianic joke, and a couple of those came out, and one person said, you might be a messianic let me try that again. If you put your deer stand pointing east, you might be messianic. I don't know. Mine's pointing east, by the way, just as by default, but maybe that was just, that's just the way it is. So maybe this was a year, 2020, that he was asking us to change our gaze. 2021. Well, let's just go out there on a limb for a second, and since I can, all right, 2021, 2, 2, and a 1. Maybe it's a year of grace, a year of favor for those who will begin to gaze where he is gazing. Again, I don't know what's going to happen with elections. Is it really relevant? And I'm not, again, that's not political. That's not against a candidate or for a candidate, but is it as relevant? Maybe this would be a better way of saying this. Is it as relevant as some people are trying to make it? Does the whole prophetic plan of the Almighty, does it hinge on who's in the White House? Does it hinge on who's in control of the Senate or Congress? Does it hinge on the unwanted nobodies, the United Nations? Does it hinge on those things? Or is it maybe the gaze has been in the wrong direction? If our gaze has been on politics, our focus, okay, I'm not saying that we disconnect totally. Please don't put those words in my mouth. Many people have tried to. It's not that we disengage, but maybe it's about engaging in the right thing. Instead of trying to influence people we can't influence, maybe look for those that we can. Would that not be the greater focus of life? Is to influence? I mean, are you trying to change Washington, D.C., or London, or Antarctica, but you don't know the name of your neighbor, the name of people that are being brought into your life on a daily basis because you've locked yourself into a house, disengaged with life in general, taking yourself out of the game. There's a page that's going to be turned. What will that page bring? I don't know. Is that page turn going to bring possibly some more aspects of, well, they call it quarantine, I call it martial law. Is it going to bring a whole new aspect of masks and another strain of a virus and all of these things and arguing about vaccines, and what's it going to bring? And is that where we should be focusing? Or is it possibly that we should be focused on 2021? No matter what it brings, it will place us one step closer to His kingdom. Well, maybe it will place those that are gazing in the right direction one step closer to His kingdom. What if 2020 was about directing your gaze? And 2021 will determine the destiny dependent on where your gaze was. Something to think about. Actually, I think that's a lot to think about. Let's be found looking where He's looking. Let's be found seeing what He's seeing. When Yeshua, at the end of right before the end of His first coming, said He set His gaze toward Jerusalem, would that not also be true regarding His return as Mashiach ben David, that His gaze would be toward the same place? Something to think about. Shavua Tov. Have a blessed, prosperous week. Bezrat Hashem, God willing. See you again next week. And until then, no matter what happens with politics and everything, be strong.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmarecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav v'yasem lecha shalom.